I feel that actually when we are looking at the multi-hazard risk reduction during the COVID-19 and the post-COVID times, that's a topic which I've taken for the session. What I would like to do is to really look at some of these issues concerning the multi-hazard risk reduction, because we are going through a global pandemic. I will actually give a brief introduction and then look at the various disaster typologies and emphasize the importance of preparedness, prevention, response, and recovery. These are the four major processes which the disaster management goes through. And in the US, they talk about preparedness, prevention, response, and recovery, 2 P's and 2 R's. The preparedness and prevention is before the disaster, and response and recovery happens after the disaster. So it's a long series of sequential events which we need to really look at strengthening preparedness and prevention, also called mitigation or risk reduction. And the multi-hazard disaster risk reduction will be also covered briefly. And we look at the multi-hazard disaster risk reduction during the COVID-19 global pandemic, because it has impacted more than 221 countries around the world. And then we emphasize the anticipatory planning for preparedness, prevention, response, and recovery. And also look at how we can prevent cascading disasters and consequent management failures. And try and recommend a few strategies for Imagineering. I'm very happy that we have Mr. Vikas Brahmawar with us with 2 patents on innovations in water treatment. And I think these are kind of things which I would also come to, because we have a lot of startup ventures which are coming up with a lot of innovative ideas. And so I would look at the Imagineering primarily from that point of view. We have the increasing frequency, economic damage, and damage to critical infrastructure and assets. This is what really happens. Property and assets also get damaged. We have the loss of lives and disruption of livelihoods. And while we're talking, we are seeing also a series of landslides and flash floods happening in different parts of the country, especially in Kerala and Karnataka. And we also need to look at the high incidence of PTSD, which is the post-traumatic stress disorder, which millions of families have gone through due to COVID, and also the long COVID and depressions and suicidal tendencies. And we have also seen some unfortunate incidents where people have actually, killed themselves by suicides. COVID-19 and long COVID, whether it is a bio-error or a bio-terror, is a moot question. And there are still different groups from the WHO trying to look at the causes of, the source of the COVID-19, which is the SARS-CoV-2. Disaster management and emergency management is becoming more transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. And we also have intergenerational and intragenerational challenges. Sustainable development was defined by Gro Harlem Brundtland, the former Prime Minister of Norway, and the commissioners in the World Commission on Environment and Development, WCED, whose report is called Our Common Future. And they define sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. I will repeat this because this is a very profound definition, which says sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So when you look at the water shortage, which is happening in many cities, whether it is Chennai or Bangalore, and we see the groundwater levels, depleting. We see the, even after blasting with rigs, and we are not able to really strike water, in many parts of the country. So the groundwater aquifers are drying up, and so we have the gray zones and we have the white zones, and so we need to really look at some of these aspects from the sustainable development point of view, because nature is a legacy which we have to transfer to the next generation. And that is one of the biggest messages in sustainable development. And I'm very happy that this colloquium is actually happening, looking at multiple thematic areas. And we also have different topics which are getting covered. So when you look at disaster typologies, we have the geological disasters like earthquakes, tsunamis, landslides, and volcanic eruptions. And we also have, the dam failures and dam bursts which happen. And we have the hydrometeorological disasters, which are floods, urban flooding, cyclones, cloudburst, drought, heat and cold waves, snow avalanches, sea and river erosion, lightning, and glacier melting and glacier breakaways like what happened in Uttarakhand and so on. And we have the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear emergencies, which are called CBRN emergencies. And we also have transportation accidents, which happen because of air accidents, rail accidents, sea accidents, and river accidents, boat capsizing, and road accidents, which happen. And we also have terrorism, conflict, riots, and other human-made disasters. I'm calling it human-made disasters and not man-made disasters because we also have to be gender sensitive. And so these are again anthropogenic. These are called created by human beings because of human interference with nature. And forest fires, oil spills, festivals-related disasters, stampede, drowning, all these also happen. And we also have epidemics, including the COVID-19, which is an epidemic which became a runaway pandemic, and livestock and poultry epidemics. So we have the avian influenza, and we have H1N1, H5N1, and different types. And we also have the pest attacks. And we also come across geomagnetic storms and solar flares, and these are also becoming important. And we also have meteors, which come and hit the planet sometimes. So we also have to be aware of these also. So these are some of the issues which we need to cover from the disaster typology point of view. And when you look at the earthquakes, landslides, dam eruptions, there's a volcano called Catopetl, which is actually having a lot of video cameras which are actually looking. Volcano is years, and others also to look at. So the use of ionosondes to monitor lithospheric, atmospheric, and ionospheric coupling, what is called LAIC monitoring by ionosondes, is also important. And there's an effort also happening in terms of monitoring TEC, which is a total electron content in the ionosphere. And there is a regional TEC mapping using GNSS stations by the International Institute of Information Technology in Pune, in collaboration with AIT Bangkok and the University Kebangsaan in Malaysia, and also the Indian Institute of Geomagnetism and various other institutions. And there's also the installation of real-time seismic monitoring instruments, seismographs and others, which are also looking at seismic activity which is being monitored. And if you really look at the regional tech mapping using GNSS stations in I2 IT in Pune, we also had an international workshop which was discussing the need to really track the tech patterns in the ionosphere, and we need to really look at these, also very important. And the landslide monitoring, the installation of monitoring instruments by Amrita University, and a project called Landslip, which Dr. Manisha is very actively involved and leading. This landslip project is in Nilgiris, in Darjeeling, and also in Sikkim. The Amrita University, the Geological Survey of India, Practical Action, and British Geological Survey, the UK Met Office, King's College London, the Newcastle University, and Practical Action Consulting in UK, and the institution called CNRI, which is in Italy. So this is a multi-country initiative, which is a 4-year project, which is actually happening in terms of monitoring landslides and in Nilgiris, Darjeeling, and Sikkim in India. And this is funded by the NERC of UK and the DFID of UK. And Amrita University is very actively involved in that. And when we are talking about these landslides, Amrita University's landslide monitoring in Idukki had actually helped in evacuating people in the landslide-prone area a few years ago. And the current effort in terms of sending the alert and early warning messages to the district administration is also extremely important. And right now, while we're talking, 27 people have lost their lives in Kerala because of floods and landslides. And we need to really monitor these kind of activities. And it's very important that saving lives becomes very, very important. And when you look at preparedness, prevention, response, and recovery, Abraham Lincoln had said, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first hour in sharpening my axe. It's very important. We need to really look at our own toolkits. And toolkits are changing, and we are getting a lot of new toolkits coming in. So disaster management used to be a multidisciplinary field, but solutions. Now we are also seeing artificial intelligence, robotics, embedded systems, machine learning, deep learning, augmented reality, UAVs and drones, and robots, and all kinds of new technologies which are actually coming in, which can also do predictive analytics, and big data analytics is also helping substantially. And Benjamin Franklin had said that by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And so we need to really strengthen our preparedness. And the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. This is also mentioned, and this is actually also mentioned by the armed forces. But this, I think, is extremely important. The more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. And we need to really invest in preparedness and also in prevention, disaster risk reduction, etc. And the multi-hazard preparedness and early warning systems become important. So we have a regional integrated multi-hazard early warning systems for Africa and Asia called RHYMES, based in Bangkok. And community-based disaster preparedness and community-based disaster risk management, CBDRM, and community-based disaster risk reduction have become extremely important. And the recent studies have shown that CBDRR, the community-based disaster risk reduction, wherever communities are actually having a strong interlinkages, with the communities and the households, the impact of COVID has been minimal. That is one of the biggest learnings actually, that we could really benefit from community interactions. And so we have seen also that intergenerational support which is there in joint families and all that also really help in terms of being a cushion to ensure that we are able to save lives, and not only save lives, even provide psychosocial support, because that is extremely important when people are going through trouble, going through trauma, especially when they've lost their loved ones. There is a need for that emotional bond which can actually provide that kind of support. Now, in terms of multi-hazard DRR, the mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction in development planning. And when we formulated the National Disaster Management Policy, which was approved by the Government of India in 2009, we mentioned that community must be center staged, and we must be technology driven in terms of our solutions. And the technology should be not only modern technology, but also indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge systems. We need to appreciate and value traditional knowledge systems. So the eco-restoration of fragile ecosystems and plantation of mangroves become important. The slope stabilization to prevent landslides become important. And multi-hazard risk identification and risk assessment becomes important, and mitigation or risk reduction becomes important. So sea walls to protect property, assets, lives, and livelihoods, or mangrove plantations. This is a challenge. We need to really look at this and resolve the dilemma by looking at nature-based solutions for ecosystem restoration. The UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, has actually announced that 2021 to 2031 will be the UN decade for ecosystem restoration. And that's where the work of people like Vikas ji becomes important, because we need to really look at replenishing our resources, natural resources, natural regeneration. So how do we really conserve, preserve, and regenerate our resources, natural resources? And that becomes a challenge. So rainwater harvesting becomes important. Solar panels become important, and ways by which we can actually intensify, replenish the groundwater aquifers by artificial recharging, and also ensuring that we can actually provide a more recharging of groundwater in our areas, which are actually also likely to get affected by drought. So flash floods and landslides in Kerala happen mainly because of the quarrying, mining, leveling of hills, filling of wetlands and paddy fields. And we have seen that, in 2018 August, when we had the floods in Kerala, even the Cochin airport was flooded, and it was also shut down because they couldn't operate the airport. So we have deforestation which is happening, and so all these are actually having an impact on nature, and we need to really understand the implications of that, especially from the risk reduction point of view, and reinvest in that. So if you look at the last 2 years, we have seen a series of cyclones which have been hitting India and the coastal areas. Actually, we have 13 states and union territories which are in the coastal areas, which are having coastal areas which are prone to cyclones and sea level rise, and and also the fact that we can have the global warming impact which can happen. So all these cyclones, and we have seen that when Cyclone Phylline came in 2013 in Orissa, more than 1 million people were evacuated, and we were able to reduce the loss of life to 23. And in 99, when this super cyclone happened in Orissa, we lost more than 10,000 people. And but because now early warning systems are there, we have the Doppler radars which are actually able to suggest where the landfall will actually happen. We are able to reduce the loss of life by ensuring alert and early warning messages go to the last mile, to the cutting edge, and then we are able to evacuate people. So need to look at pest attacks, and are we able to use technology to understand the movement of pests which could come and harm the croplands? We need to look at flash floods and landslides. And so it's not only forecasting, it's also nowcasting which is happening. The Indian Meteorological Department is also able to do nowcasting. And we also have many other systems, including the NASA and many other international organizations like the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, use satellite imagery, which can actually also provide information on the deformations which can happen to critical infrastructure before, during, and after disasters. So we look at flash floods and landslides, forest fires, urban floods, and hospital fires which happen in various cities in the country, which is very, very traumatic, because we see the hospital fires happening, and during floods, or during cyclones, even during the COVID, we have seen a lot of hospital fires happening in many parts, and many patients have lost their lives. We also saw the glacier breakaway in Uttarakhand, and the gas leaks which happened in Vizag also, it happened, and then we recently also saw a gas leak which happened. In terms of cooperation between institutions, training and capacity building become important. Education and distance education and disaster management become important. Early warning systems and sharing of technological know-how become important. Experience sharing of good practice case studies from across the world become important. Multilateral and bilateral donors, exchange visits and study visits with other countries, and also even across states. International conferences and COVID-19 caseload trend tracking and excess death studies by many people. You have seen Dr. Brahmar Mukherjee in Michigan, or Dr. Arvind Subramanian, or Rukmini, and many others. Murad Banaji in Middlesex, many others are doing this excess death studies. And we see that data becomes important, data science become important. So we have two portals. One is called covidtoday.in, and there's a COVID dashboard by the India Excellence Foundation, which I'm associated with as a chief mentor. And so we try and support, the curating of data for ensuring that, we cannot say that we do not have data, because we're talking about digital India. And so, when you say digital India, then, we need to have technology which can actually help us. So data science become important. So we really need to really look at that. So we have an organizational platform called the International Emergency Management Society based in Oslo, Norway, and Brussels in Belgium. Website is teams.org and teams.info. And a Capacity Building International, which is capacitybuildingint.com, based in Texas in the US and also in Kyiv in Ukraine. And RIMES, I mentioned earlier, it's in Bangkok. We also have an Asian University Network of Environment and Disaster Risk Management, auedm.net. And we also have a multi-country platform called the Vairo Commission, huairou.org, based in Brooklyn in New York, which is actually connecting grassroots women leaders across 50 countries. The Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, ADPC, in Bangkok, and India has actually also set up a Indian Universities and Institutions Network for DRR, managed and hosted by the NIDM, the National Institute of Disaster Management in Government of India. And these institutional platforms become important. So we have the Teams International certification called TQC, which is actually providing an international certification on emergency management. You can see that there are 8 people certified, and I am one of the people certified, first Indian and the 8th person in the world to be certified on this TQC certification. And so we also conduct monthly webinars and on emergency management. The last one was day before yesterday, on the 15th, actually 3 days ago. And we have these webinars, and there's an annual conference coming up on the December from 6th to 9th of December in Paris. It's a virtual online conference. So these are some of these issues, and risk governance, consequence management of reopening schools, colleges, and universities. How will that affect, the COVID caseload trends? This is something which we are actually looking at through scenario analysis and modeling in some of these data portals. Emergency response, inundation and damage of croplands, and destruction of infrastructure, assets, and amenities when water is released from the dams. And that's what happened in 2018 in Kerala. And we are seeing that also now when water is gradually released from the dams. We also have the evacuation of more than 1 million people, I mentioned, in Cyclone Phylum in 2013, and search and rescue by fishermen rescuers in Kerala floods, and Amrita University's alert communication network to fishermen in deep sea. These are some of the solutions and innovations which have actually helped communities at risk. And partnerships become important. SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 17. Goal 17 is on partnerships. And I feel that that's the most important SDG, because we need to connect with people. We need to learn from best practices across countries. And we are safe only if everyone is safe. And Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, said this. We also have the IPCC 6th report, which was released last month. And it was mentioned that climate change is the code red for humanity. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said this. We must not leave anyone behind. And that means we need to be inclusive. But we have seen how the interstate migrant workers were traveling, and how they were really totally at a loss, because the countrywide lockdown was announced and they really could not provide any support, because all transport networks were all out of service, and they're all withdrawn. So there is a need to really look at sensitive, responsive handling of the needs of communities. So do no harm and leave no one behind. Inclusive and participatory awareness campaigns become important, and need for establishing more startup firms through incubators. And so this is, again, Amrita University also has incubators which are supporting startup firms. We need to also look at mobile apps and web portals for data aggregators and curating knowledge. This is a product called Wolf Air Mask, which is for sanitizing classrooms and theaters and auditoria. Robots for sanitizing offices, and these are all technologies which are actually all responding to the need. It's not supply driven; it has to be demand driven, and that is again what Mr. Vikas Brahmawar's solution is actually a demand driven solution, which is actually addressing a demand but he's coming up with a product and a service. And so we need to really look at these kind of solutions, which are important. And finally, drones for transporting COVID-19 vaccines. And we have seen that also happening. So these are some of these issues. And in terms of consequent management failures and cascading disaster impact, we need to know that future is unpredictable. But at the same time, can we prepare ourselves to anything happening anytime, anywhere? And that's a bottom line in disaster management. We need to be really prepared, and we need to have dashboards. We need to have databases. We need to have socioeconomic and demographic profiles of communities. We need to know who are the people who are who are bedridden and who are on wheelchairs, and what is the palliative care patients. We need to know who are the people who are physically challenged, mentally challenged, and we need to really look at all these, and how can we create agile systems through design thinking and systems thinking, and zero tolerance to avoidable deaths and disasters. This is something which we put together during the National Disaster Management Authority's initial formative years in 2005, 16 years ago. But we find that a painful experience has been that this is not really respected. We are not seeing that zero tolerance to avoidable deaths really respected. We need to have more understanding of societies, understanding of stakeholder groups, understanding of regulators, understanding of governance systems, both in corporates as well as civil society and governments. And Philippines has said zero death in disasters. And this is very aspirational, but at least, zero tolerance to avoidable deaths and disasters is something doable, and we need to really do that. I think, these are some of the things which I wanted to share. And finally, Imagineering. I want to leave this as a thought, because I saw that 33 new billionaires, unicorns have come up in the last 18 months. And this is very important, that the startup ecosystem is changing. And we see crypto finance, we see Bitcoins, we see blockchains, and we see AI algorithms, machine learning, robotics, embedded systems, UAVs and drones, and a lot of IT-enabled products and services. And if you have the imagination, if you have the drive, the passion, we will be able to really save lives and also protect livelihoods. So I would like to stop here. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I hope that, we will also be able to interact. Thank you.